Welcome back. I am so excited that you have joined me again in the Aligned Womb, Aligned You podcast. I'm Kate Nagai, and I am your host and womb guide on this journey. I'm here to help you to lean into the language of your menstrual cycle so that you can align yourself and awaken and activate to your womb wisdom to live the most inspired life. I am so excited to jump into this episode and to dive into today's topic. So let's get started. Welcome back, everyone, to the Aligned Womb, Aligned You podcast. I am so excited to have a guest speaker on today. I have Laura Watson with us today. Laura Watson is a fertility coach and mom of 2 donor-conceived children. Her personal journey includes failed fertility treatments, several unsuccessful rounds of IVF, and 3 heartbreaking pregnancy losses before completing her family with donor egg IVF. She now supports women pursuing fertility treatments to build their families and help them find control, confidence, and joy in a complicated process. Laura founded her coaching service, Positive Fertility, in 2022. She is the author of the Positive Fertility Blog, was featured as an author in the 2021 collaborative book, Infertility Success, Stories to Help and Bring Hope for Your Journey. She lives in Boston, Massachusetts, USA with her husband and her 2 children. Welcome, Laura. I am so excited to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Kate. So good to be here.
I am very excited to have this conversation because I have a few clients that have gone through donor eggs. And I have in particular one client that I actually just got to meet her little donor baby last week. And I was so excited. And during our conversation, it was coming up some things that her and her husband are starting to ponder now of, when to bring things into conversation and how to explain the process. And because they don't want to keep it a secret, but they also have an older daughter that was conceived naturally. And so it was through secondary infertility. So I am so excited to dive into this conversation and hear your journey, hear your shares, and any other wisdom that you want to give to our listeners today.
Great. When I was going through the beginning of my experience, I really felt so, and a lot of women I know share this, that we just feel really lonely. I felt like I knew so many women and couples who had done IVF and that's how they got their families. But for me, traditional IVF wasn't working. And I felt like now it's getting weird. And I don't this is a part of the journey that I didn't even know existed. And I would have loved to have heard a story like mine when I was going through it, just to connect with someone who had been there, who found success that way. And so I love sharing my story because I know that somebody else is out there who's like, yeah, that's exactly how I feel. That's exactly like, and she's been through it, and she has this family that she won't stop talking about, and she's happy, and I want to get there. And so that's exactly why I started sharing my story from the beginning.
I love it. So do you want to share a little bit about your story then?
I love to.
What happened and how you got there here?
So in the beginning, I got married. I was 40 years old when my husband and I got married. And we knew that we wanted to start a family, but I also was somewhat familiar with, the numbers. I had read the articles before, and there's that, statistic that it basically, when you're reading the statistic, you feel like, okay, at 35, my fertility just falls off a cliff. That's kind of how it reads to anyone who is getting older and either not ready to start a family or is, thinking about it for their future. I was not ready to start a family when I was in my early 30s. But as soon as I got married, I was like, okay, that's the next step, right? We're going to have a family and maybe we'll need some help, but I didn't really know what that looked like. I didn't understand. I knew nothing, completely clueless about IVF. All I knew was that for so many women, that was the answer. You do IVF.
Yes.
And then you get a family. And I had heard some stories from friends and things like that, but I didn't really know much about it. We had a very similar path that a lot of women do. We saw the doctor, and I had been trying. I think we had probably been trying for maybe 3 months or so, and I probably lied and said I had been trying for 6 months, and I just like, this is silly. Why are we messing around? Let's at least get some numbers. And this is in 2016. So I really was not receiving any of the education or information that I think more women do now. Like, here, just order this test online and we can tell you about your fertility, or go to your doctor and ask for these tests. Nobody ever told me, like, ask for these blood tests just to get an idea. I didn't know that that was an option for me. So we started with medicated cycles, and we did a couple of IUIs, and that took, I don't know, a handful of months. And then the doctor was like, I'm not surprised that these didn't really work for you. The blood work did show that I had low AMH. And so for any listeners who are not familiar with that particular test, it's one of the basic fertility blood panel. The AMH hormone will reflect an idea of what an egg reserve will look like, while an FSH hormone will reflect the quality, potential quality of a woman's eggs. And so my AMH was very low. And the doctors did tell me, look, that this doesn't mean that this isn't going to work, but we do want the IVF protocol to be pretty aggressive. What I've learned since then is that with low egg reserve, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't get pregnant. It just means that you may struggle to respond to the traditional stimulation medications. And that's exactly what happened to me. I just did not respond. I think my first cycle before an egg retrieval, we got 3 eggs, all 3 eggs fertilized, which was amazing. And one blast was able to be sent for testing and then returned with a chromosome abnormality. And so while we did get to that point, we weren't going to transfer that embryo. We did a second egg retrieval. We got 2 eggs, 1 fertilized, but didn't make it to day 5. A third egg retrieval, we got 1 egg, and it didn't fertilize. So I just kind of summarized about 1.5 years of fertility treatments in a very short amount of time. But at this point, I just, was kind of at a loss. Like, I didn't know anyone that IVF didn't work for. I didn't know that it wasn't gonna, we were paying the dues. I was taking the medications. I was changing my diet and taking the supplements and doing the yoga and going to acupuncture, but it wasn't working for me. I think I knew before the 3rd egg retrieval that we were not on the right path. I did start doing my own research into donor egg, and would this work for me? What does this cost? What does this look like? How does it work? Where do I find someone? So I started doing the research, and then after that 3rd retrieval, the doctor said, I'm not saying you can't get pregnant. I obviously want you to get pregnant. I don't think IVF with your own eggs is the way that that's going to happen. So probably 3 or 4 months later, I went to my first seminar at my clinic where they talked about egg donor IVF. They talked about donor conception. And while I was really scared about a lot of the logistics and the costs, and what does this mean? How do we, how do we find someone? What is this going to be like for me to not use my own genetics? I also really wanted a baby. And I was confident that this was the answer. Like, this is how that's going to happen. So I kind of I didn't kind of, I just went for it. I started taking all of the steps because like I said, I really wanted a baby. And then kind of on the sidelines, worked on trying to figure out my own mindset on it and coming to terms with that. And that did take a little while, but I at the same time was so excited about the idea that like this was probably going to work and I was going to get to be a mom, that I think that it made the work a little bit easier. We found our donor in the summer of 2017, and she would be able to start. I remember very clearly the day I got the email, like, donor said, yep, she's on board, let's do it. We went through an incredible agency that was so helpful to us. And it was hard to go through. I went through so many donors. I had a spreadsheet. Oh my gosh, I had the most amazing spreadsheet.
I love spreadsheets.
Yep. It was a way for me to take control of this process of all of these potential donors, why I liked them, why they fit into kind of the criteria that we were looking for, what agency they were with, blah, blah, blah. I got it down to, I think, 5 potential donors, and knowing that there was one of them that I was like, this is my girl. But I wanted my husband to have some input. So I brought my husband 5 donors. It wasn't a PowerPoint presentation, but it may as well have been. It was like, here's her photo. Here are the reasons why I think that she would be a good fit as our donor. Here are the 2 or 3 things that I think that we would want to talk about. And we went through this. And ultimately, we landed on the same donor. She said yes. Her testing and both blood work and she had to go in for a psychological testing and just all of these conversations to make sure that she would be an appropriate donor for us. Those all happened in the fall. She started her cycle I want to say the end of October or November, and the first weekend of December, I had a fresh embryo transfer, and a week later, the second line turned pink, and I was pregnant. So
yay!
It moved so fast. Like once it was like a yes, like this is going to happen, it moved so quickly. So it just happened so quickly, and it was all good news. That was what was amazing about this part of the journey. In the beginning, when I was trying to get pregnant with my own eggs and it wasn't working, it was just one disappointment after another. And once my donor said yes, it moved fast, and it was just yes, yes, yes for everything. And it was a really different experience. 9 months after my son was born, I realized that I was pregnant. I got pregnant unassisted, and unfortunately, I realized that I was pregnant because I was losing the pregnancy.
Oh.
I wasn't supposed to be able to get pregnant. I had no idea that I was pregnant. I had stopped breastfeeding not long before that, and so my cycles were still not regular. And so when I skipped a period, I didn't know that was a reason to I can't get pregnant. So
yeah.
That was so confusing for me. And but it kind of, I think, drove us to decide that we wanted to have a second baby. So we started that process with our clinic. And meanwhile, I'm still processing a very complicated emotion of losing a pregnancy that I wasn't even prepared for. And we did a frozen embryo transfer, and I got pregnant again. And I just could not believe how easy that was. And I was like, of course it's easy this time. And of course it worked again because, we paid our dues. Unfortunately, I lost that pregnancy at 10 weeks. After that, I had to grieve that pregnancy, but also really wanted another baby. And I thought that was going to fix how I felt. I was sad, and I was, again, the feelings after losing a pregnancy are so complex. And I really just wanted to feel better. I wanted to get over it. And so I thought the answer was to just keep trying and getting pregnant. And I remember working through some of that pain and saying to my husband, but we're so lucky. We're so lucky that we have other embryos. There are other families who are feeling the way that I feel right now, but they don't have another chance. That was their last embryo. And we are so fortunate. We're so lucky. And I just kept focusing on that and moving forward. And while it's okay that I was moving ahead, I didn't really take the time to process my grief. And I suffered another pregnancy loss. This one was very early, and an embryo loss when another transfer just didn't work, and another embryo didn't survive the thaw before the transfer. And so I became really anxious and nervous that while I am so happy to have my son, is that it? After all of that, I thought, I thought this was going to be easy. I did become pregnant again, and this time with a little girl. And there was something about that pregnancy that did feel different. Just even preparing for the embryo transfer, I felt a little bit different. I felt a different kind of hope and a certainty that this was going to be my baby. I said to my acupuncturist, I'm nervous to feel this way. I'm nervous to have this kind of hope, because what is it going to feel like if this one doesn't work? And she said, is it going to, you know what it feels like when it doesn't work? You know how devastating that is. Is it going to be more devastating because you are feeling so positive about this? And I was like, I cannot imagine that it will. And she said, so hold on to that. Let's enjoy that. And sure enough, that one stuck. And I had to manage some anxiety along the way, especially in the early parts of the pregnancy. And I learned so much about how to identify what tools were going to work for me, how to feel a little bit more in control, how to feel strong, how to reach out for help and to accept that, and kind of get comfortable with being uncomfortable so I could process it, and also acknowledge the grief that I had experienced leading up to this pregnancy, which I'm still working on. But after my daughter was born, I thought to myself, I'm not done. Like I might be done having children, but this journey that I've been on is so special. So I started writing about my experience. I wrote an article about my decision to choose donor conception, which was published on an online magazine. And I couldn't believe the support that rolled in from that. And so many people wanted to hear more about my story. And that's when it kind of clicked that, this is important for me to share all of my story, continue writing about it, continue talking about it, to offer that support and that connection to other women.
That's amazing. So I have so many questions in my head right now.
Yeah.
But just to be clear, your son was through a donor egg, and then your daughter is through your own eggs?
Nope.
Oh, it was a donor egg as well?
Exactly. So
Okay.
we had frozen embryos from that original cycle.
Oh, from your donor.
From my donor cycle. Exactly.
Okay.
So we had frozen embryos. And so all of the embryo transfers that we did after my son were all from the donor cycle. So my son and daughter are actually both from the same donor cycle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. I was like, wow.
I know.
Yeah.
The one time that I was able to get pregnant on my own resulted in a loss very quickly.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of another light that went off, like, oh, I can get pregnant. I can't have a baby. Like, I didn't know that. That's just an extra layer. I will say that, while those losses that I experienced, really, I'm still struggling. Mm-hmm. I still have moments where I have this grief that I'm not really sure what to do with. And so I have learned the beauty in finding support for something like that. And so that's another thing, like even though I'm the coach now, I still need my own coaching, and I still need that support for things that I'm experiencing.
So with the grief that you're experiencing right now, or that you're still currently moving through, is some of that around your own egg quality, or is that still around the donor process?
It's a little bit of both, and they're separate. So I
Okay.
absolutely I would say the majority of my grief is on processing pregnancies that I've lost.
Okay.
And the most traumatic, while it was really all of my pregnancy losses were difficult, the most traumatic was from a donor cycle, donor egg embryo that was transferred. The grief that I feel regarding using donor conception rather than my own genetics looks different. And grief is not necessarily the word that I would use to describe it at this point of my journey.
Right.
It's more, I'll give you an example. Sometimes I will see a woman and her son or daughter, and they look exactly alike. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
They're just the characteristics, um, exactly alike is not actually the right term. There's just characteristics about them where there's no doubt that this is mother and child.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I have a little bit of sadness where I'm like, I'll never have that. My children, who are very much my children, won't look just like me. But here's the thing. People will say to me all the time when I'm with my children, oh, she looks just like you. Or I had a classmate of my son, a mother of a classmate of my son say to me once at a birthday party, like, he is such your mini you. And part of me wanted to be like, oh, it's funny that you say that because we actually don't share DNA. But at the same time, people see what they want to see. They see what is instinctive to them. So I believe that people see me and my daughter and see exactly what I saw in that mother and child. So the grief is not necessarily, we don't share DNA. I didn't pass my genetics off. It's more, did I miss something in the bond of a mother and child? Is there something that some kids get in that bond that my kids don't? And the answer is no. I know that the answer is no. But it's just a little bit of, oh, I don't know if do my kids feel that way? Do my kids have that? My husband said to me along this process when we were pursuing donor eggs, he said, Laura, you have all of these incredible qualities that you're going to pass on to our children. You are patient, you are compassionate, you're funny, you love to read and you love music and you're a great dancer and like you're just a happy person. That's all going to be passed on to our kids because you're going to be raising them. They're going to be with you every day. They're going to love to read. They're going to love music. They're going to learn how to be compassionate people. The things that would come from your DNA, then like that's not nearly as valuable, I don't think, as what we're going to be teaching them. So maybe they'll have all of those qualities that you teach them, but also have the potential to be good at math. So
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned this because my husband's Asian. And so, and for those that are seeing or have never met me before, I am, blonde hair, white skin, like I am as pale can be, very different complexions. And none of my children look like me, like not one of them. In fact, I think it shocks people sometimes when I show up at the school to volunteer in the classroom because I'm not what they're expecting. Because my oldest definitely looks very Asian. Where my other two, they're definitely, you can tell they're a mix. But I remember when my first daughter was born and we had her at a birthing center. So it wasn't at a hospital. And I think that maybe I had really big expectations, but I had this like beautiful vision in my head that I was going to give birth. I was going to see this baby and I never really pictured what the baby was going to look like. I just pictured like, you're going to see your child and then you're going to cry and embrace. And it's like, this is mine. And I remember when I seen her, I was like, this is like, it looked nothing like me. It caught me totally off guard. And it doesn't mean that I didn't love her or anything, but it just, the shock value of me going, she looks exactly like my mother-in-law. Like, it was like
Oh, wow.
a little version Asian baby. And I was just like, I don't know why my brain just didn't go there. But I think in all the visualization, all the work that I was doing, I just always, I don't know, visualize this baby that in some way would look like me, I guess, maybe. And I wasn't even
Mhm.
cognitive of it. And
Yep.
it caught me off guard. But what you're saying here is like, realistically, my 3 children, they look nothing, nothing like me. Their complexion's different. Their hair color is different. Their hair texture is different. I have natural curly hair. They have straight hair. Like there is nothing, even body size. They look nothing like me. And so really, when I look at them sometimes, and when I was listening to you, the only thing genetically, if I was looking at like what the outside world might see as genetics, is maybe their health history. Like
Mhm.
that's all that they're ever going to be able to like say, this is identical to my mother.
Yep.
But their behaviors, the way they move through their life, the way they interact with others, their kindness, their heart, like everything that I'm putting into them as moral values, that is me. Because I am the
Yep.
primary parent that spends the time with them, that makes sure that I'm molding them to a version of me, I
Yep.
guess, in a way, right? Like with my ideals, with my thoughts, with how I want them to be a human in the world.
Right.
Um, and so, yeah, I totally get what you're saying right now. I don't think I ever really processed it that way, but yeah, my kids genetically, you wouldn't know looking at my
Right.
family photos.
It was so important to me that our donor had blue eyes because I have blue eyes. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought to myself, well, if they end up with blue eyes, then people will think like, oh, you got your blue eyes from your mom.
Yeah.
My husband, well, his eyes are very kind. They are just brown eyes. Like there's just like really not a whole
Yep.
lot of character, and they're just brown eyes. And of course, so that was like the one physical trait that was really, really important to me. And and I looked at these women, and of course I was attracted to the women that were similar to me, which is just instinct. But they had to have blue eyes, and of course neither of them have blue eyes. And um, so of course that the brown eyed gene is going to
To be
dominant.
dominant.
It's the
Yeah.
dominant gene, and I don't even know if my husband has a recessive blue gene, but blue eye gene. But I just that was so important to me. Like maybe there's a chance that they'll have blue eyes. And my daughter's eyes took forever to like find their color. And it was like some days it was like, oh, maybe there's a shot. And nope. She has these beautiful, big, warm brown eyes, and my son's eyes are so dark that and he has blonde curly hair, and so like his dark eyes next to his blonde curly hair is so cool. So that's the other thing. I find my children to be just the most beautiful creatures I've ever
Mm-hmm.
laid my eyes on. I wouldn't want them to look any different.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want them to be any different than the way they are. And so when I think about the fact that we had to use a donor, I like to think of it like, it took the three of us to create this people. It took my
Mm-hmm.
husband, the egg from my donor, and my living in my womb for those 40 weeks. It took that combination to make these children. Any other circumstance would be different,
Mm-hmm.
and they would not be who they are. And so any grief or that I have from not being able to use my genetics is kind of dismissed by my gratitude that we had this opportunity and that we did use a donor egg, because I'm so thankful for the people that they are.
Are you looking for an easy way to track your temperature and track your menstrual cycle? I highly recommend checking out the thermometer ring. The The thermometer ring is this little ring that you place on your finger every night before you go to sleep, and the ring tracks your temperatures through the night and then puts all the data into a very simple and easy app for you to keep track and to look at and to know when your peak is about to happen, when you've been ovulating, and to know when your menstruation might be coming on. This app and this ring have been a game changer for me. I highly recommend going to check it out if you are a fan of tracking your cycle. Go and check out the link in the show notes below to find out all the information about the thermometer ring. Yeah, and the reason why I asked that is I think that's the number one thing that goes through some of my clients' mind when they're at that crossroads of, this isn't working naturally, this maybe isn't working through IVF. Then it's always that it's not guilt, but that sadness of just like, well, what happens if I do this? What am I going to feel like afterwards? And so,
Right.
that's why I asked about that question about grief, is just because I think some people really ponder that of like, if I make this decision, is that going to manifest in a different sensation or feeling in our body? So I'm so glad that you touched on that, because it is a real thing. And you're going to, no matter what choice you make, I think you're going to feel a rammet of different emotions.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know my story, but I had 3 ectopic pregnancies and I lost a tube, and I was told that I was never going to get pregnant naturally, that I needed to use only IVF and to remove my last fallopian tube. So essentially then any conception that happened after that was only going to be through IVF. It would never be able to happen because I wouldn't have fallopian tubes. And I remember just not feeling good about that. But I remember, walking out of that appointment and looking at my husband like, there's got to be a better way, and going on this mission of anything holistically that may heal my body and doing all of the above. But after doing that for over a year and not working, just, and having losses in that year as well, of just getting to this point where I was done. Like, I remember we had this conversation and I was like, I cannot do this anymore. Like, the grief is too heavy. The anxiety every month is too heavy. Like, I'm done. But I'm not done wanting to be a mom, right? If I sit back and look at this whole experience, at the end of the day, the most important thing for me is to become a mother. I don't really care how it happens. And, we were 31 at the time when we were having this conversation. And so, both of us being in the beginning stages of our career, finances was a huge thing. And in Canada, it's really expensive for IVF, and it's not something that's covered through any kind of health benefits whatsoever. And so, we had to have, and I always share the story with my clients of like, this is a conversation between the two of you. And when you have this conversation, a lot of healing can happen, because in that conversation, he now knew that I was like, I just couldn't deal with the grief anymore of the losses, of the unsuccess. And so I said, I'm willing to try for 3 more months. Like, I'm willing to give it everything we got, still do all of the things that I'm doing for 3 more months. But after that, I want to reclaim my life. And I want to go right to adoption. And he was like, no, it's really important for me to at least try once to see if we can do it through IVF, right? Like, there was something that was still in his mind of having it be his genetics. And for me, I was like, at that point, I was like, I just don't care. I just want a baby in these arms, and I'm tired of this journey. And I was really money focused, because I was like, and I guess because I worked at an acupuncture clinic, I knew the stats of how many unsuccessful IVFs, and all I kept doing is calculating the math in my head. And I was just like, we can't afford this. Like, we cannot afford this. And so we came to an agreement that we would try naturally for 3 more months, and then we do 1 round of IVF, but I wasn't willing to spend more than 1 round. And then after that, we were going straight to adoption, because all I wanted was that baby. I didn't care how it came. I just wanted a baby. And then we would see for the rest of the future what would happen. Maybe we'd go back to trying again. Maybe we would just go to IVF and do the surgery that they recommended. Maybe we would just adopt a whole bunch of kids. I have no idea, but I just knew that I needed to have a win. And for me, adoption was that win. And then we were really lucky. Like, a month after that conversation, I don't know if it was the freedom that I felt from owning what I needed and really being clear of what I needed. We ended up getting pregnant naturally. And then from there, I had my other 2 naturally as well. But I really feel like there's so much power sometimes of just being able to openly share with your partner about
Yep.
how beaten down you feel and
Mhm.
about the reality of really reflecting, like, yeah, you know what? The world paints this picture that a baby should come because two people meet, everything works out perfectly, and this
Right.
baby just comes out of your love, right? But that wasn't our story. And years into it, I was just like, emotionally, this is not fun. This is
Yep.
not fun anymore.
Right.
And I just want a baby.
That's exactly how I felt, where, I driving up to that third egg retrieval, and I said, this is crazy. This isn't gonna work. And my husband was like, what do you mean this isn't gonna work? Like, you're about to go under anesthesia. Why are we doing this if it's not gonna work? And I was like, well, I need to try one more time, but this is just, we're on the wrong path. I know we are. And I want a baby. And having a baby and building my family was so much more important to me than using my own genetics.
Yeah.
And like, like you said, like, I'm a nice person. I have a lot of great qualities, but like, I don't think that my DNA is all that important.
My heart health really doesn't matter at this point.
No,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so I do feel very fortunate that I was able to come to that conclusion quite easily because of what I wanted. But it is really difficult when someone is kind of in the mess of it, all kind of tangled in it, to
Mhm.
understand that they will feel better about it. They will, even once you're pregnant, I think that that bond happens so quickly that you're not likely won't feel you'll feel the grief differently.
Mhm.
And I do want that for every woman that is considering donor conception, every family that's considering donor conception, but it does process differently for everyone. And so while my story, I tend to tell it from this point of view of someone who's already had success, who already has their two children.
Mhm.
So of course it's just like, it was great. I wouldn't
Mhm.
change a thing. In the moment, it was really hard. And then I'm feeling like this is unfair. Like, why do I have to do these procedures? Why do I have to ask another woman to help us? And those are all really, really difficult feelings. And so I want to make it clear to anyone who's listening that is struggling with this, that it is important to take your time and to work through that and to process that grief and to connect with someone to talk about it in a very raw and in a very vulnerable way. So you can work through all of that and get to a
Mhm.
place where you're ready,
Mhm.
to take those next steps. Because we all do that in a different way, on a different timeline.
Yeah, and I would think, like, if you're in a place right now where you're really struggling with infertility, don't take anything off the table yet until you just explore it a little bit, of questioning it and seeing, maybe finding success stories with it,
Right.
finding the answers that you have, like, every question you have, it's valid, and there is an answer out there, and it might
Yes.
help you get clarity for or against the decision, right? And it's really interesting because listening to you talk today, a part of my brain was going, why didn't you ever consider donor eggs as part of your journey? And it's funny because, like, I had to sit there and think about that while you were talking. And I think for me, we could get pregnant. They just kept getting stuck in my fallopian
Yeah.
tubes, right? And so for me, I didn't consider donor eggs, I don't think. And I considered everything,
Yeah.
but I don't think I considered it because I considered my womb broken. I didn't consider my
Mhm.
eggs broken. I considered my
Yep.
womb broken. And so for me, it would have been more looking at surrogacy versus
Right.
donor sperm or donor eggs. And
Right.
I don't know, I have a lot of things processing in my head. Okay, I know we only have a few minutes left, and there is, like, I guess, two burning things that I really would like us to cover because I think it will be really impactful for anyone that's listening that is potentially on the donor journey or looking for the donor journey. My first question is, and it doesn't have to be five. I always throw it to five. It can be three. But I guess, what are your top suggestions to help you feel empowered and to support yourself during the donor process. And this can be anything from practitioners to mindset, whatever it is. What were your
Sure.
like top things that you're like, if you're on this process, do these things because I really feel that they'll help you move into this journey?
Um, well, I'm going to start with like my number one thing is being identifying your things, because what makes us feel empowered and what makes us feel in control is going to look different for everybody. So identifying what your methods are, I think, is the number one thing. But within that, with some of the more effective tools that I've seen being used are, first of all, kind of looking at it as a like mind, body, heart, right? So like mental, emotional, and physical. So like mentally, what do you need um to really explore how you're feeling? And I think journaling is one of the most effective tools in this. Um I get a lot of pushback on journaling sometimes. I don't want to journal. I don't like to write, and I get it. It doesn't even need to be like pen to paper. Like I actually do better typing stories, but just I honestly feel like taking what's in your head and moving it from your head to a page and make it look different. And it can take away some of the power that your fears hold. And it just to look at them in a different way can help you process it differently. For example, if I'm someone and I'm suffering from some anxiety in terms of preparing for a procedure, so just writing about it, just getting my mind to put it into actual words rather than thoughts, I think can show us exactly what the triggers are and exactly what we are afraid of so we can tackle it. Kind of like, they say when you go to therapy, your baggage becomes lighter when you take it out and see what's in there. And so, you know what your baggage is. And I think that that's similar to journaling. When you write down all the stuff that's clouding your mind, it looks so much more manageable. So journaling is I think, one of the most effective ways that we can get control of what we are struggling to process. Physically, I think that movement is one of the most empowering things that we can do, especially for our physical health. And so that looks different for everybody, right? Like I really enjoy yoga and I love to walk. I like to go outside and walk, and I always feel so much lighter and have more clarity after doing something like that. But I think the act of moving and being physically active is incredibly effective in gaining some control. This is what I turned to when I was pregnant with my daughter and suffering from some anxiety in terms of being pregnant after loss. And so I chose, with my doctor, safe and appropriate exercises for where I was in my cycle. And I felt like, okay, I am taking control of my body. I am, doing something that I'm controlling something within my body. I am doing something that's good for me, something that's good for my daughter. And this makes me feel good. And it doesn't have to look the same for everybody else. Like movement, like I said, it can be like going for a walk. It can be doing some safe yoga. It can be even meditation in the right way, I think, is good for our physical health. And then finally, taking care of our emotional health. I think seeking out support is really important, and not necessarily to get advice, but to having a safe space where we can say things out loud that that we find fearful or that we're struggling with. So I think saying it out loud in a safe space is really effective, as well as connecting with someone. So whether that's someone that has gone through something similar that you have, or connecting with a therapist or a doctor, that can offer you tools that you may not have thought of, but just saying things out loud and that connection, I think, is so important to managing this process, no matter where you are, especially I think for donor conception. I think connecting with somebody who either has gone through this process or maybe is a donor conceived person themselves or the parent of a donor conceived person. I think that goes a long way, is connecting with them and feeling less alone and hearing on how they got from point A to point B and found their success.
Then my next question, and I don't know how old your two children are at this point, but I know that some of the clients that I've worked with, this is that now that they've had their donor babies, this is where they're at in their phase of, okay, we've done this, we have our baby now, but how do I want to start to create or plan to create the experience where I can safely and honestly tell them about how they came into this world. And I think you like laid this out beautifully earlier about how it takes a sperm, it takes an egg, and it takes a body, right? Like all three of us work together to bring you into this world. And I don't know if you have resources. Like I think once I found, because someone was asking me for a resource, so I was trying to research it. And I think there was a board book out there that talked about just that, about how you came into this world because of, your dad, the egg, and mommy's body, right? And I haven't read the board book. I just remember seeing it going, that's a beautiful idea. I
Yeah.
love that they've done this. But
Yes.
do you have advice for women that are now like post the donor egg situation, but are now looking at, how do I want to map out having these conversations and making them feel still empowered and part of this family, and like really, I don't know, the words aren't coming to me of how I want to express this, about just like how this was a choice that really was a choice that was aligned, and one that you made because you were excited about the possibility of them becoming your child.
Mm.
I don't know if this is coming out right. I'm on like
That's
2 days
okay. I
from my
gotcha.
period. 2 days from my period. My brain's not processing. Here's the words that are coming to me.
Yes. No, I gotcha. And this is actually a very important topic to me because while when I work with clients, I always want them to take their own path and do the things that are right for them. This is something that I feel very strongly about, is the importance of sharing with young children very early on. I am not exaggerating when I tell you that I started telling my children their story when I was still pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And because I talked to them all of the time, but the main reason I started doing it so early was for practice, because it's super awkward in the beginning to tell your child, explain your child's conception to them. It's just like, they're like, what are you talking about? Or maybe they're a baby and they're just looking at you and you're like stumbling through the words and you're like, of course, no, mommy and daddy really wanted a baby. And you're stumbling through, like telling the story. We used a doctor and this didn't work and that didn't work. And let me tell you about the time that mommy did this. And like mom got mad at dad because she was, on her stims. And
Yeah.
it's awkward at first. And so with practice, it just becomes more and more natural. And there's a lot of studies and research and also advocacy work within the realm of donor conceived people, and donor conceived people wanting to understand more about their genetics and rightfully wanting the feeling as though that anything that's held back from them is wrong. And so the donor conceived people who really struggle with their truth are mostly children that learned later on. It was really important to me that my children, there was never a time when I would have to say, I have to tell you something about your conception. They would always know. And they would always know because it's just part of who they are. It is their story now. It's, the IVF and the getting pregnant is my story, but the fact that they're donor conceived is their story. And I'd never want them to feel like it is a big deal because it's part of who they are and it's how they got here. But I never want them to feel like it's something that we're certainly nothing that we're ashamed of, and that it's different. It is special is what it is. And so we have shared their story with them since the very beginning. And then it expands. And as they get older, so my son is 5.5, almost 5.5. My daughter is 2.5. And so it looks differently with my son than it does for my daughter at this point, right? Because now he starts to have some questions. And I love answering those questions. It's so exciting when he starts to ask questions. And he may be the only child in his kindergarten class that can tell you exactly what an embryo is.
My kids at 8 and 9 can tell you what estrogen and progesterone are. So
yeah. Yep. My daughter, it looks a little different. Like sometimes she chooses the book, and sometimes I ask if we can read this book as well as whatever other book she wants to read that night, because it is important to me that and sometimes my son will hear me telling the story and want to come in and be a part of that with her. He's interested in it. There are several books that are available that I think are really great books. I am going to share the title of what I think is my favorite and what I think is the most natural sounding one. It's called Happy Together. It's by an author named Julie Marie, who is a donor conception parent. And she has several versions of the story. So sperm donor, egg donor. She just released 2 more. And one of them, I think, is a double donation story. So a parent using both a sperm donor and an egg donor. She also has, a story of 2 fathers using an egg donor, 2 moms using a sperm donor, and she has tried to rewrite the story. So there is a version for every beautiful donation story out there, which I think is so nice.
I love that.
Yeah, me too. And I don't know the author personally, so I'm not plugging her book for any particular reason, except that it's the one that has resonated the most with me and my children. So we just try to talk about it on a regular basis. My donor was anonymous, which was pretty much the norm when we were going through our process in 2017. Now, even just 5 years later, the process does look a little bit different, where there are more and more open donation scenarios, which tends to be, according to the donor conceived people community, they feel strongly that that is the healthier route to go. I will do everything that I can to support my children down the line if they are looking for more information on their donor, more information on their medical background. I will do everything that I can to support them in that, but I don't have a name that I can give them. I can't say the name of your donor was this and here is her phone number. I can't do that. They can reach out to their donor, to the donor agency that we use at a certain point and request that information. But let's be realistic. Because these days they can likely, find biological relatives at, using things like ancestry.com or 23andMe, and I will support them in that. So that's just, my plan is to be honest and supportive through this whole process with them and encourage them to ask questions. My son has this beautiful head of blonde wavy hair, which I mentioned earlier, and I know that he gets that from our donor. And while the nights that I'm brushing it and he's screaming at me, they're not my favorite, at the same time, it's so beautiful. I'm so grateful for that. And he has such I think, a unique look. And I, am proud to share with him, like, I think your donor had hair similar to this. And, she'll, maybe someday we'll have to ask her what brush is the least painful.
I love it.
Yeah.
And I really like that
So
you
I
said,
hope
like,
that answers your
oh,
question.
totally does. I really liked that you said start early so that you can keep practicing it so it doesn't feel so awkward. That's
Yes, I think that
great
that's so
advice.
important. I think that that's so important. I do, and I encourage anyone who has any questions about that to reach out to me or anyone in the donor conception community to ask questions, because there is support out there to make it a little bit easier for you, and that's what we all want. We want, parents of donor conceived children to feel supportive so
Mhm.
they can support their children, and I know that they want to raise healthy, strong children that are proud of how they were conceived, and but being truthful and being honest, being open, and being supportive, I think are part of the foundation of raising those children.
Okay, so there's one more thing I want to ask you before we go here. And I asked this because you posted on your Instagram this week and I read it and I resonated so deeply with it. Not for maybe the same reasons, but as a woman, I resonated with it. And I think it's so valuable, A, for this donor conception conversation we're having, but also for anyone that's maybe not even doing donor conception to think about, like, how often as women we feel this and how we do this. So you had shared that someone had asked you about your children and I'm probably not telling this quite correctly, so fix it
Nope, it's okay.
afterwards.
I'll fix it. Yep.
About how asked you about your children and you lied about donor conception because you
Mhm.
didn't feel safe. And I'll in a minute tell the story because, like, it blew my mind because I thought it was so honest and raw that you shared this, and then your aha moment from it. A year ago, my dad passed away, and I was at his funeral, and someone that he had worked with, like 20, well, probably not, maybe 17 years ago, not quite 20, came up to me, and I haven't seen this person in like a decade at least, and was like, "I'm so sorry. What are you doing with your life right now?" And I'm a menstrual cycle coach, and for whatever reason, in this small town where that's just not something you talk about, all of my shame, my woman shame came back in me and I couldn't get the words out. I said I was a stay-at-home mom. And I went home afterwards. I went to my mom's house afterwards and I told my husband the story. I'm like, I feel so gross. Like, I feel like I'm going to throw up. Like, why did I say I was a stay-at-home mom? I just diminished like 7 years of work of my craft that I put
Yes.
into. And not that there was anything wrong with stay-at-home mom, but
Mhm.
the problem was that I felt shame about saying that
Mhm.
I work with women trying to conceive. I am a menstrual cycle coach. Like, why was I so scared to talk about that
Mhm.
stuff with him? And instead, it was just easier. It was an escape to say, I did this, which
Mhm.
just did not feel right. And so he was like, I don't know why you did that. So,
I think that we do know why you did that. You were in a very vulnerable place. You were feeling incredibly emotional
mhm.
and you were feeling unsafe.
Yes,
And you didn't want to talk about it.
I
And
know.
it was easier for you to say, I'm a stay-at-home mom, than to say, I don't want to talk about this right now. Like, I'm
Exactly.
grieving my loss, and who are you? And
Yeah.
I just don't want to talk to you right now.
Yeah.
And like that would be so uncomfortable. Now people think you're rude, and now you have to apologize for not wanting to talk about it. Like, and I,
So your post
and
brought up
also
this
like
memory.
you were, you panicked because you were in a safe place. You were not in a safe place,
Yeah.
right? So that's very similar to what happened to me. So I was pregnant with my son. And so this must have been 2018. So I'm 43 years old or about to turn 43. And I was with someone who I didn't know very well. Was asking, she was an acquaintance, I'll say. And she was asking me all these questions and talking about how, I think she's a few years older than me, but she was talking about how she also was hoping to get pregnant and had all of these questions about getting pregnant. And she was like, well, did you use your own eggs? And there was just something about the way that she asked it where I didn't know how to answer it because I wasn't in a place where I wasn't feeling safe. I hadn't like really mastered my story yet. And I felt very vulnerable. So I blurted out, yep, yeah, yeah, and will you pass the ketchup? So, and I don't even remember how my husband responded. He probably wasn't even really listening. As soon as it came out of my mouth, I was like, oh shoot, like now what am I gonna do? Like, do I backpedal and tell her I just lied? Do I let it go? Like, this isn't a secret. Like, eventually if she wanted to know like how I got pregnant, she's going to know that I lied. I'm just gonna move on. I'm just gonna stop talking about it. And later, and I really did think about it a lot. I felt like a jerk because I lied, and I felt like this is not how I want this to go. This is not the how I want this pregnancy to go. This is not how I want to parent this child, by making anybody feel that I'm not so proud of how we created this person. I should have handled it differently. I should have said, I don't really want to talk about my pregnancy right now. I'm feeling funny. I'm feeling hormonal. I don't know. I should have just said something to the effect of like, I just don't really feel like talking about my pregnancy right now. Because while using donor egg is not a secret, it wasn't a secret. It was still very private to me. This is before I started sharing my experience so publicly. And it was still something I was working on. It was still something I was, working through, and how I was going to manage things like questions. And this wasn't a person who I felt really had any, I didn't have any obligation to share with them the details of how I got pregnant. So while I don't feel good about the fact that I lied for several reasons. One, I don't lie. I'm an honest person. And two, like, I'm very proud of the fact that we use donor egg, and I obviously am very open about that now. But I also understand the idea that I felt unsafe, and I felt that like a boundary was being crossed. And that's why I did it. And I offer myself forgiveness for making the wrong decision. I offer myself understanding that making that one statement at that one time does not mean that I felt shame. It meant that I felt unsafe. And I've obviously learned a lot from that. And I think sharing that on Instagram was really hard for me. And I kept thinking, like, what if she sees it and she's like, oh, I knew she lied, which is certainly possible. She might be texting me right now. Um, Also, I wanted to offer that story, that anecdote, some truth to, it's not always easy. It's not, that the process is not always filled with like, everyone hear my story. Sometimes I wish that I was able to bring those children here. Of course, I wish I was able to bring those children here, those exact children, without going through all of that struggle and pain, without the expense, without having to ask someone to use their genetic material. I wish it was simpler. And at that particular moment, I needed it to be simpler to make the conversation stop. And it is okay to feel that way. My feelings, my complicated, for anyone who's listening, I'm making like a circular motion with my finger to be like, it's so complicated, and that's okay. You're gonna unravel it, and you're going to find the right path and the way to talk about it. You're going to figure it out. You're going to figure out how to talk to your children about it. You're going to figure out how to talk to loved ones about it. You're going to figure out how to share the story in a way that makes you feel safe and allows you to keep your boundaries. I wasn't there, and I offer myself forgiveness for not handling it the way that I would now. And I think I learned a lot from that entire experience. And I wanted to share that with my audience so they know that, like, I don't have it all figured out. I've never had it all figured out. And but I try to share the tough stuff with everyone so they feel that connection with someone who's very real and whose experience was very similar to theirs.
And I think it's that honesty and that willingness, because obviously you shared it not because you're like, this is going to autocorrect what happened. Instead, it's like, I'm going to share this because I feel safe. Actually, I've created an experience now where I feel safe, even if Instagram's not safe. I feel safe
Yeah,
sharing it.
right.
And for myself afterwards, one of the things that I did is I looked at my husband and I said, okay, that didn't feel good. And it still doesn't feel good because that's not who I am, much like yourself. I need to workshop this out of how am I going to tackle this the next time it happens so that I do feel safe to
Yeah,
be able to be honest with
right.
my story, right? And for anyone that's listening, I think just like yourself, you workshopped it out, even if it was in that moment while you're passing the ketchup, you workshopped it
Right.
out of like, why did this happen? Doesn't feel good. What am I going to do moving forward in the future, right? And that can be something that you revisit over and over again through the years, but also for anyone listening, knowing that it's also very okay, I personally think, to lie if that's what's going to make you feel like you can get through that moment. And it's not even lie. I think sometimes, especially when we've been on this journey and we're now sharing our journey with people to inspire and to help, there is this idea that we are supposed to be completely transparent, that we're supposed to share every detail. And it doesn't always feel safe sharing every detail. I've openly shared about my journey, but there's some details that I still keep very personal and intimate to myself because I don't know if I really want that out in the public world wide web, right? And so those parts that I don't openly share on podcasts or on blogs, I do openly share one-on-one with clients if I know that they're going through a similar experience and they're feeling the exact same emotions that I know that I kind of felt with, like
Yeah,
if there's a relationship there and it's safe because we're one-on-one, I will open up and say, well, here's an element that I don't openly talk about, but I've been there. I get it. This is how I move through it. And, you know, don't feel like that's what's punishing you for your journey. Right.
right.
And so just know that you never have to be an open book to every single human being out
Exactly.
there.
Right.
But if you do feel gross after saying something because it wasn't authentic to what you want to exist as, workshop it out in your head. You may have messed it up the first time, but you don't have to mess it up the next 15 times. Or,
Right.
you create new variations, kind of like how you said with your donor story. You started when pregnancy, so that way you could workshop it out and figure out
Exactly.
exactly how you wanted to share it with your kids. So your story on this journey, you can workshop it out to how you want to share it. And that story might look different from friends to family to people on the street to a coaching business. And I think it's just really important as us as women that I think a lot of us feel that sometimes in different situations where we say something then we're like, that doesn't really feel good. And
Yeah.
I don't want you to feel more shame for that. Instead, know that, like you said, and that's what I loved about that post was that you were like, when I sat with it, it was because I wasn't safe. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, that's so beautiful that you came full circle to that. So thank you for
Oh,
sharing
thank
that.
you.
I really loved it. All right. I've kept you long enough. I loved having you on here, but I do like to end these calls with one quick little tip that I like to give out to our readers. So it's called Living a Womb-Led Life Tip. Now, our conversation has been around donor eggs, around donor conception. So what is your womb-led tip that you would like to share with anyone that might be on this journey?
Don't be afraid of the ugly stuff. Find a way to express it, being that connecting with another person or journaling or getting it out of your head and onto something that's more tangible so you can take a look at it and take away its power. But the working through the ugly stuff is hard, but it's so important and we all have it. So find a way to get it out of your head and into a place where you can process it properly.
Okay, thank you. And so for anybody who's listening to this, that's maybe thinking about or on the journey for donor conception, Laura, she offers us coaching services. She has programs. Laura, where can they find you?
They can find my website at positivefertilitycoaching.com, and you can follow me on Instagram at positive.fertility.
All these links will be added in the show notes below. So
Beautiful.
don't feel like you need to quickly find a pen, replay, scribble it down. Just go to the show notes and you'll find all of her contact information in there. Thank you so much, Laura. This has been a great conversation. Thank you for opening up about your story, sharing your journey, and hopefully inspiring some of our listeners here that are, feeling beat down by this journey of knowing that donor conception is a very viable option for them. Are you excited about aligning to your cycle? If so, make sure that you subscribe to this podcast and like the episode if it really resonated with you. Until next time, remember, womb wisdom equals connection to self, which ultimately equals inspired living.